when an empath finally stops trying to please everyone and begins to see reality clearly, something remarkable happens. Something Carl Jung himself noticed. They don't suddenly turn selfish. They turn powerful. Not dangerous to people in general, but dangerous to every system, every relationship, every structure that has fed off their endless giving. Jung called this transformation individuation, and for an empath, individuation is the most threatening thing they can bring into a world built on their self-sacrifice. Picture the exact moment it begins. You're sitting alone, maybe after yet another draining day of carrying everyone else's emotions. You said yes when you really wanted to say no. You've kept smiling to make others comfortable, even while your own chest felt heavy. You've soaked up so much tension from those around you that your own nervous system feels scorched and raw. But then, something different rises up inside you. Instead of pushing through, instead of numbing it, you pause, and you hear yourself asking a question you've never dared to ask before. What if I just stopped? That simple question is what Jung described as the beginning of true consciousness. And for the empath who dares to answer it honestly, there is no going back to sleep, no returning to ignorance. Because here's the part that almost nobody tells you. What people call the empath's gift, the ability to feel everything, isn't really a gift in the beginning. It's what I call survival sensitivity. It's a trauma adaptation dressed up as kindness. Jung saw this exact pattern over and over in his practice. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But here's the trap. Empaths can't fully become who they are because they've never learned who they are, separate from the flood of other people's emotions. And let me show you what really happens in that first crack of awakening. The empath doesn't slowly tiptoe into awareness. No, they collide with it. What Jung called the collision with the unconscious, a jarring, almost violent realization that their entire identity has been built on one lie. The lie that they are responsible for everyone else's feelings. Jung tracked this exact dynamic in his writings on individuation. He found that deeply sensitive people often develop what he called inflated compassion. They get hooked on being needed because that's the only way they've ever been allowed to feel valuable. But when that illusion finally breaks, something extraordinary comes alive. The authentic self starts pushing through the cracks. This is where Jung's insights become revolutionary for empaths. He revealed that every human being carries what he called the shadow, all the parts of us we've hidden, denied, or locked away. But for empaths, the shadow holds something most people would never expect: rage. Raw, unfiltered rage at being used, manipulated, overlooked, and drained. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, that darkness isn't some kind of evil force. It's their buried anger. It's their unspoken needs. It's the voice they silence to keep the peace. And when they finally turn to face this shadow, everything shifts. Because here's the truth. The empath who discovers their shadow doesn't turn cruel or cold. They don't lose their heart. They become something sharper, something stronger. They become what I call consciously selective. They stop pouring themselves out for anyone and everyone. They start seeing manipulation in real time. They recognize the emotional vampires they used to miss. They start to notice the difference between a real need and a manufactured crisis. That's not cynicism, it's clarity. Jung saw clear patterns emerge when highly sensitive people began the process of individuation. I like to call these the 8 signs of conscious awakening. And if you recognize them in yourself, it means you're going through what Jung described as the birth of psychological sovereignty. Sign 1. The energy shift. The very first change is what I call the energy reversal. Instead of your life force constantly pouring outward into everyone else, it starts flowing back toward you. Jung saw this in his patients again and again. When people stop unconsciously giving away their energy, they suddenly have reserves for themselves. You don't feel so drained after social situations. You stop soaking up the moods of everyone around you. And maybe most importantly, you stop feeling guilty for protecting your own boundaries. Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, claim it. My sensitivity is my strength. But here's the fascinating part: other people notice this shift before you even do. They sense you're no longer available to serve as their emotional landfill, and some of them will try to shame or guilt you back into your old role. Sign 2. The mask comes off. Jung called this stage the death of the persona, the mask we wear to fit into the world. For empaths, that mask is often the nice one, the helpful one, the person who never says no. But once individuation begins, that mask becomes impossible to keep in place. You begin saying what you truly think, instead of what people expect to hear. You voice your own preferences instead of always yielding to others. You admit when you're exhausted instead of pretending to have endless stamina, and this frightens the people who relied on your self-erasure. Jung cautioned about this very point. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet, for the awakening empath, self-acceptance finally outweighs social acceptance. Sign 3. The projection returns. This is where Jung's insight becomes essential. He discovered that we constantly project pieces of ourselves onto others. Empaths, in particular, project their depth, their sensitivity, and their capacity for care onto people who may not actually hold those qualities. But during individuation, what I call the projection recall takes place. You stop chasing potential and start recognizing reality. You stop excusing bad behavior. You stop believing that everyone is secretly good deep down, but just misunderstood. Jung explained it perfectly. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And, for the awakening empath, the irritation at selfishness reveals something hidden that they've buried their own healthy selfishness for far too long. Sign 4. Boundaries become sacred. Jung noticed that people who reach true psychological maturity form what he called a personal relationship with the unconscious. For empaths, this means finally paying attention to their inner signals instead of living by external demands. You start saying no without needing to justify it. You stop apologizing for having needs of your own, and you begin to recognize a crucial truth. The only people who get angry when you set boundaries are the ones who were benefiting from you not having any. This isn't selfishness. Jung described it as individual integrity. For the awakening empath, I call it sacred selfishness, the recognition that caring for yourself isn't just acceptable, it's essential if you want to have genuine, balanced relationships with others. Sign 5. The guilt disappears. This may be the most surprising change for empaths. The heavy guilt they've carried for years for having needs, for taking up space, for disappointing others begins to dissolve. Jung called this stage the integration of the shadow. Once you stop rejecting hidden parts of yourself, you stop feeling guilty for simply being human. You come to see that guilt was often your programmed reaction to other people's manipulation. When someone tells you, you changed, in that disappointed tone, instead of scrambling to reassure them, you think, yes, I have changed and that's the whole point. Jung once said, the individual has always been unconscious of himself and has remained so. But the awakening empath finally becomes conscious of their own worth, independent of other people's approval. Sign 6. Authenticity over approval. Jung's individuation process moves toward what he called self-actualization, living from your inner truth rather than bending to external expectations. For empaths, this means choosing authenticity over approval. Even when it costs you certain relationships, you stop performing emotions you don't actually feel. You stop pretending to agree just to avoid conflict. You stop forcing yourself to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, just to make other people comfortable. And here's the paradox: this kind of authenticity draws some people in like a magnet, while pushing others away. If you've noticed people treating you differently the moment you found your backbone, you know exactly what I mean. They sense the shift before you even announced it. I call this authentic magnetism. When you let go of the need to be liked by everyone, you naturally become deeply attractive to the right people, the ones who resonate with who you really are. Sign 7. The healer heals themselves. Jung noticed that many healers are what he called wounded healers, people who pour themselves into helping others as a way to avoid their own pain. But in individuation, something radical happens. Empaths finally turn their healing gifts inward. For the first time, you start asking, what do I need? Instead of constantly asking, what does everyone else need from me? You begin tending to your own inner child instead of trying to parent every adult in the room. You recognize a truth you've been avoiding for years. You can't give from an empty cup, and your cup has been running dry for a long time. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," and this is where the awakening empath finally gives themselves permission to discover who that is, separate from the role of emotional caretaker they've been playing all their life. Sign 8. Conscious connection. The final sign is what Jung described as conscious relationship, the ability to connect with others deeply without losing yourself. In the process, the awakening empath begins to develop what I call boundaried compassion. You can feel with others without drowning in their emotions. You start attracting people who honor your limits instead of those who exploit your kindness. You begin forming relationships rooted in mutual respect instead of one-sided giving. You learn to love people without needing to rescue them. If you've reached the point where you can read people clearly but no longer crave their approval, claim it. I see you, but I don't need you. Jung observed that individuation naturally leads to richer, more authentic relationships because you're finally showing up as your real self, not the version of you that was always performing. But Jung also warned this process is not romantic. He called it the night sea journey, a passage through darkness, disorientation, and loss that must happen before rebirth. For empaths, this stage feels like death because in many ways, it is. It's the death of the false self, the version of you that was built on pleasing and serving others. And yes, you may lose friends along the way, especially the ones who only valued the version of you that revolved around them. You might feel lonely when you start learning how to be alone with yourself for the very first time. You may even grieve the relationships that were never built on love, but on your usefulness. Jung once wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." For the empath, awakening means descending into their own inner underworld before they can rise into their true, authentic self. Jung was one of the first psychologists to recognize how deeply the mind and body are connected. For empaths, years of soaking up the emotions of others builds what I call energetic toxicity. It shows up as chronic fatigue, constant anxiety, digestive troubles, even autoimmune struggles. But when empaths stop living to please everyone else, something shifts. The body begins to heal. The nervous system finally softens. Sleep comes easier. Chronic pain often lightens. Jung understood that emotional healing and physical healing cannot be separated. Your body was never designed to carry the weight of everyone else's emotional garbage. The moment you stop being the world's emotional landfill, your health begins to naturally repair itself. Jung also observed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, always transforms relationships. Some bonds grow deeper, others fall away. For empaths, this sorting can be painful, but it's necessary. I call it the great relationship purge, the moment when real connections separate from exploitative ones. The people who truly love you will adjust to your boundaries and honor your growth. The ones who resist were probably benefiting from your self-neglect. Jung called this the difference between genuine love and neurotic attachment. You'll notice that many relationships were based on an unconscious contract. You provide endless emotional support, and they give you conditional acceptance. When you break that contract by finally claiming your own life, some people will leave, and that's okay. Let them go. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. When empaths stop being everyone's emotional sponge, they don't lose their sensitivity, they develop something I call conscious sensitivity. They still feel deeply, but now they choose what to take in and what to let go. This conscious sensitivity is a superpower. It lets you read situations with accuracy without being drowned by them. You can support others without draining yourself. You can love fully without losing who you are. Jung named this differentiated consciousness, the ability to stay centered while still connecting to others. The awakening empath becomes what Jung described as a conscious individual, someone who walks through the world with sensitivity intact but boundaries uncheckable. And Jung believed that when one person transforms, it sparks transformation in the collective. Your personal awakening gives others silent permission to do the same. The empath who stops people-pleasing doesn't just change, their own life they show others another way to exist. Your courage to set boundaries inspires others to set theirs. Your choice to stop absorbing everyone's emotions shows them they can carry their own. Your willingness to express yourself authentically reminds them they don't have to perform to be loved. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But this transformation only happens when at least one person shows up authentically." Jung also outlined principles that guide those who have individuated, what I call the conscious empath's code. These are 5 guiding practices that help you keep your psychological sovereignty while still staying connected to others. First, feel everything, absorb nothing. Your emotions belong to you. Their emotions belong to them. Second, give from overflow, never from depletion. Third, love others without losing yourself. Fourth, help only when moved by inspiration, not when pushed by guilt. Fifth, trust your inner knowing above outside pressure. These aren't rigid rules. They're living guidelines, ways to protect what Jung called authentic being in a world that profits from keeping you unconscious. Jung understood something that still feels true today. Society often calls individual self-awareness selfish, because unconscious people benefit when others neglect themselves. That's why, when empaths begin to put their own needs first, they're often accused of being cold, distant, or uncaring. But Jung made an important distinction. There's a difference between unhealthy selfishness and healthy selfishness. Healthy selfishness means you take responsibility for your own happiness instead of placing that burden on someone else. It's about creating boundaries, not building walls. It's about practicing self-care rather than abandoning yourself. For empaths, this is a life-changing realization. Looking after yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't pour into others if your own cup is empty. And most empaths have been running on empty for years. Jung's idea of individuation included something he called the inner marriage, the blending of the masculine and feminine sides of our psychology. For empaths, that means balancing their natural openness and receptivity with a healthy sense of strength and assertiveness. You learn not only to give, but also to receive, not only to say yes, but also to say no. You discover how to hold both your nurturing side and your independent side together in harmony. Jung called this wholeness, the state where you no longer depend on someone else to complete you, because you've already learned how to complete yourself. This is when the awakening empath realizes they can be both soft and strong, caring yet firm, sensitive yet sovereign. Jung also noticed that sensitive people carry rare gifts when they learn to manage their sensitivity consciously. What I like to call the empath's toolkit begins to emerge. Intuition sharpens when it's no longer clouded by other people's emotions. Creativity flows when your energy isn't being drained by constant caretaking. And real, meaningful relationships form when you attract people who meet you with the same authenticity, instead of those who only take advantage of your kindness. Jung once wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart." For the conscious empath, that vision cuts through the noise and the pretense. It sees the truth. And yet, Jung also observed that this process of individuation often brings a season of loneliness. For empaths, that loneliness can feel especially heavy. You've spent a lifetime being surrounded by people who needed you, and now you're learning how to be with yourself. But here's the key. Jung drew a line between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of being cut off from others. Solitude is the joy of being deeply connected to yourself. The awakening empath begins to truly enjoy their own company for the very first time. In solitude, you start to hear your own inner voice without being drowned out by the noise of other people's emotions. You uncover your own likes and dislikes without the weight of external expectations pressing on you. You actually meet yourself maybe in a way you never have before. But Jung's process of individuation doesn't end in retreat from the world. It naturally leads to a conscious return, a re-engagement with life. The awakened empath steps back into relationships and community, but now from freedom rather than from pressure. You offer help when it flows from authenticity, not because guilt is driving you. You show up in social spaces because you genuinely want connection, not because you're terrified of being left out. You share your gifts with the world from a place of fullness, not from the desperate hunger to feel needed. Jung described this as conscious participation, living and engaging with life as your real self, not as the mask you once wore. Jung also understood that real psychological growth in a straight line. It unfolds in rhythms, in cycles. The awakened empath will continue to face challenges, especially when it comes to protecting their boundaries and expressing themselves truthfully. There will be moments of uncertainty, moments when old patterns whisper for you to slip back. But every cycle teaches you something deeper. Every challenge strengthens your inner core. Every boundary you uphold makes the next one easier to keep. Jung called this spiral growth. You revisit the same lessons, but at higher levels of awareness. The secret is to see these returns not as setbacks, but as proof that your transformation is unfolding. And Jung also believed individuation carries responsibility. Healing yourself inevitably awakens the desire to support the healing of others. Yet the conscious empath's way of serving looks nothing like the old people-pleasing script. Instead of rescuing, you demonstrate healthy limits. Instead of soaking up their suffering, you hold steady space for their own unfolding. Instead of fixing, you trust their capacity to rise into their own solutions. This is what Jung named authentic service, helping from a place of wholeness instead of from your wounds. You turn into a lighthouse, radiating light for those ready to see, but not chasing after ships drifting in the dark. Jung's ultimate vision was what he called the self, not the shallow ego, not the social persona, but the integrated totality of your being. For empaths, that integration means welcoming every dimension of who you are, the tender and the resilient, the nurturing and the fierce, the one who gives and the one who receives. You no longer apologize for your deep sensitivity. You stop burying your intuition. You embrace your intricacy rather than shrinking yourself to fit into tidy boxes. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The integrated empath embodies that paradox, both soft and strong, both open and shielded, both connected and sovereign. So here's the truth I want you to hear. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's your superpower. Your boundaries are not selfishness. They're self-respect. Your authenticity is not excessive. It's exactly what this world needs. Jung spent his life studying how humans become whole, and he discovered that the path always demands bravery. The bravery to disappoint others in order to stay loyal to yourself. The bravery to stand alone rather than betray your values. The bravery to choose growth when comfort tempts you. If you see yourself reflected in these 8 signs, you're already walking the very path Jung mapped out more than 100 years ago. Trust the process. Trust your intuition. Trust that stepping fully into who you are is not just your right, it's your responsibility. And if you recognize yourself in these patterns of transformation, claim it out loud. My breaking point became my breakthrough. Because when an empath stops trying to please everyone and starts seeing reality clearly, they don't lose their compassion, they gain sovereignty. They don't stop caring, they simply learn to include themselves in the circle of care. They don't abandon others, they just stop abandoning themselves. This is the true gift Jung left for every empath who's exhausted from being the emotional caretaker of the world. You don't need to carry everyone's pain to prove you're worthy. You don't need to sacrifice your soul to deserve love. You can be both sensitive and powerful, both loving and boundaried, both intuitive and unapologetically authentic. The world doesn't need more drained and broken empaths. What it needs are conscious ones. Empaths who give from freedom, not from obligation. Empaths who help from fullness, not depletion. Empaths who can love others without erasing themselves in the process. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next dimension.